What's up, Carbon Collective? Zach here, one of our co-founders, and today I want to walk through a report that just dropped from the IEA, the International Energy Agency, about what is the pathway to reaching a net zero emission world by 2050. Net zero is a really key marker to us avoiding catastrophic climate change. It is the point at which we are operating our global civilization without having emissions from burning fossil fuels from them. And that's really important because to solve climate change, the first thing we have to do is stop polluting. And then the second thing we have to do is to take the existing carbon that's been polluting and then sequester it back so it's out of the atmosphere. But we can't do that second part unless we do the first part if we're still adding to it. So the IEA released this report looking at exactly this pretty complicated model of what is it going to take to get there within the next 30 years, which is what scientists, kind of the global community, has agreed upon is the point that we need to get in order to avoid catastrophic levels of warming. So in this video, I'd actually like to walk through it and call out what stands out to us. So in starting here in 2020, we are emitting 33.9 gigatons of carbon. That's a lot. We have about 190 gigatons left in the below 1.5 degree carbon budget. So we have to start cutting the amount of emissions that we're emitting really fast. And so what you can see here is in blue that the largest source of emissions is from electricity and heating, then followed by industry, then transport, so cars and trucks, then buildings, heating, cooling, cooking, etc., and then other. So the easiest thing for us to do, the lowest hanging fruit, and what's really going to unlock the rest of this process is this sector, electricity and heating. Renewable energy is already among the cheapest in the world, and that is only going to get cheaper with scale. And so by 2025, you can see that the goal is to cut 3 tons from global emissions, and that you can see this has already been cut by 3 tons right here. Most of that has been come from electricity and heating. And then going even further to 2030, electricity and heating has dropped all the way to below industry here. And that's because industry, a lot of these heavy industries, things like steel and cement, they don't have the technology yet to fully decarbonize. It's coming, but we do have the technology for electricity and heating and increase in the technology for transport. So you can see by 2030 here that 60% of global sales of cars are electric, and that we are adding 1,000 gigawatts of annual solar and wind additions, so quickly transitioning off of using fossil fuels. If we are able to get into this place where we have renewable energy providing clean, cheap, abundant electricity, it enables and sets the stage for these other industries to be able to decarbonize and reach net zero as well. So that by 2035, you can see industry has shrunk even more, but you start having transport where trucks are increasingly electric, and that global fossil fuel use is at 50% of 2020 levels. And so this is a key thing that we want to call out. If you believe that we are going to be on this path because we have to be, then you have to also believe that fossil fuel use is going to decline precipitously over the next 30 years. And as things continue, you can see by 2040 in this estimate, it's all the way down to 6 tons. So that's going from 33 down to 6 in 20 years. At this point, all coal has been phased out. Existing buildings have been retrofitted so that they are zero carbon, and they're not using things like gas boilers to heat themselves. And here, even aviation, that they are using low emission fuels like from bio or synthetic fuels in order to fuel themselves. And so and what's left here is that industry is going to be some of the hardest to decarbonize and some of the most expensive. And so what you see being called here is that around 90% of existing capacity in heavy industries, again, steel, cement, things like that, those previous investments have reached their end of their investment cycle. They've paid off, so they're going to be rebuilt and have new factories and sites and things like that. And so this is the time to invest in the zero carbon infrastructure that has been in R&D and it started getting scaled in the 2030s. And so looking into the 2045, at this point, heat pumps are providing 50% of heating demand. Natural gas is at 50% of its 2020 levels, and that we're still using nuclear power and hydropower, in addition to what has emerged in this scenario as the main source of power, which is solar and wind. And so that by 2050, the world is still going to be emitting some slight emissions from industry. There are industries that are still going to be really hard to decarbonize and still will probably use some fossil fuels like the plastics industry. And similarly in transport, airplanes, shipping will probably still have some carbon impact, but it's such a low amount that it can actually be offset by the amount of carbon that we capture. And so it's at this point where we start seeing the transition, where it's okay, we have stopped the pollution that is going in. The tap in the sink is off, which means that all efforts then have to go into increasing the size of the drain. So I had a few emotional reactions to this report. The first was excitement. This is a clear path that is economically doable, and it's a necessity. And we have the technology we need. Over 80% of the emissions that this report calls for being reduced within the next 10 years is all just based upon scaling the technologies that we have that is already happening. It's just, how do we do those things faster? And that's one of the things at Carbon Collective that we want to enable you to be able to do, to align things, safely align things like your retirement account and other investment accounts with that transition, and pushing the companies who are maybe lagging in that to transition as quickly as possible as well. So my second reaction is that it's also pretty hard. The level of global coordination that this 30-year project is going to take is staggering, and it's easy to fall into feelings of maybe doubt, to say it at best, maybe some despair over what's going to happen. None of us can predict the future of how this is going to shake out, and the most that we can do is control what we can in our own lives. So on that note, a stat from the report that they called out was that 55% of the emissions reductions, so from 33.9 to 0, come from choices that individuals make. 55%. 4% come from behavioral changes, and about 40% come from decisions that you and I don't have any real impact on, like what happens to a steel plant or in utility scale electricity. But that 55% is really significant. It's a majority. And it's not the little things, the choosing to bike to work, which is great, don't get me wrong. It's the big things. It's so you don't have to make a choice, but you can just drive your electric car that's powered by solar, and that you heat your home with a heat pump, you cook your food with an induction stove, and you have your house be retrofit so that you're using as little electricity as possible that entire time. So that's where 55% of our emissions come from, and it's especially on us, those who lived in advanced economies, who have more money, to be the early adopters of these. They generally will save you money over time, and all of these technologies, when there is more demand from them, they scale. And so the cost goes down, which allows more people to adopt them. So the cost goes down, which allows more people to adopt them. And so that's exactly what we need to be doing. So this is in our hands to get here. And yes, it's daunting. And yes, we have to do it. Thanks so much for watching. Send any comments that you have. If you want to check out Carbon Collective, go to carboncollective.co. We would love to have you as a member.